Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, January 31st, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about why the Electoral College doesn't exactly favor the Democratic Party, as I, previously presumed, and also we're going to take a look at the swing states and talk about why I think the Democrats, have a much better chance at winning the popular vote than they do winning the election, and what that actually means for them when it talks about, when we talk about the competitiveness of the electoral map, because the Electoral College has skewed to the Republican Party for quite some time now. The Republican Party hasn't won the popular vote in 6 out of the 7 most recent elections. So looking at the popular vote results, I would say the Democratic Party, an immediate shoo-in for popular vote. I mean, Donald Trump never won the popular vote. George W. Bush won it once in 2004, but since 1992, the Democrats have won it every single time. And what that actually translated to was only a Democratic victory 4 out of those 7 times, or sorry, 5 now out of the 7 times, because we had Donald Trump, and then actually no, so I guess we're up to 8 since 1992. I didn't realize I'm using an old statistic here. I guess 7 would be from 1992, from 2000, I guess, onward. Let's just use that for example. The Democrats have won, only 3 out of the 6 elections since the year 2000. 2000 and 2004 were won by the GOP, and 2016 was won by the GOP, but the Democrats were able to carry 2008, 2012, and 2020. But a 50% win rate when you win the popular vote 5 out of 6 times doesn't really mean that the Electoral College is really a fair system for the Democratic Party. And I'll show you exactly why. Because if we're looking at the election results, right, one cannot ignore the margin of victory for Joe Biden on the popular vote. I mean, this isn't the exact percentage. I used the New York Times to find that exact, concrete percentage. It ends up being a 4.5% victory for Joe Biden. And what that actually translates to is a roughly 5% victory when you're rounding upwards. And I know what you're thinking, 5%, that doesn't seem like a lot. But on the popular vote, 5% is a very significant amount. I mean, that's, practically the 2012 margin of victory for Barack Obama over Mitt Romney. In fact, larger than that. But the Electoral College victory wasn't as large as Barack Obama's back in 2012, and that's an indicator that maybe the electoral map isn't exactly as skewed to the left as many people might think. You see, what we saw back in 2016 was all Hillary Clinton needed to do was win those 3 Rust Belt states. I mean, even though she lost the Electoral College, all she needed to do was win these 3 Rust Belt states. But let's talk about why they were even competitive in the first place. You see, I find it very interesting that she was able to win the popular vote by 3 points, but still lose these Rust Belt states, still lose a number of swing states. And I think that's an indicator that, even though the Democrats may win the popular vote, it takes a lot more to win those swing states, which means that a lot of these swing states actually skew to the right. It's just the Democrats have consistently won the popular vote, and sometimes by very large margins, that the states seem competitive. But at a 50-50, tie in the popular vote, Republicans would be winning elections left and right. And that's largely due to the fact that Democrats have a very large amount of voters from California, from New York, from Texas, from population centers. And I know, Texas is a red state, but there still are millions of Democratic votes coming out of these areas. And that doesn't directly translate to support in the swing states. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, they're not as large as California or New York in population. And even though Democrats may be getting votes from some of these states, this is not where the majority of their vote is coming from. And I think, because a lot of these Democratic voters are compacted into states that are underrepresented on the electoral map, like California, like Texas, like New York, it actually puts them in a position where Democrats can run it up in the state 70-30, whereas they previously might have been. We can actually take a look at the historical election results in each state. 2004, that's a perfect example. John Kerry won California by 9.9%. Well, he lost the popular vote to George W. Bush, the only Democrat to do so since the year 2000, or 1992, actually. But looking at the result in California, it was a 9.9% victory, and John Kerry still came close because he had a lot more widespread support around the country. Even though he lost the popular vote, he had still won Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. So that means these states actually swung to the left. But as years progressed, they started voting to the right of the national popular vote. And the reason why Democrats started expanding their margins in the popular vote was not because they were increasing support among swing states, but rather among states that were previously within a certain margin that are now plus 29 for Joe Biden. Plus 9.9 to plus 29 is a very significant shift, but it's still the same state that's voting the same exact way. So the number of electoral votes won by the Democrats really doesn't change, but the popular vote margin absolutely does. But looking at, the margin here in this election, I think it perfectly highlights that, despite Joe Biden winning the popular vote by 5 percentage points, he was still within 0.1% in Wisconsin, 1% in Wisconsin, 1% or 3% in Michigan, 1% in Pennsylvania, less than 2%, but around 1 if you're rounding down. So looking at the election results across these 3 states, I mean, even though Joe Biden won the popular vote by 5 points, these states still were exceptionally narrow. And it wasn't just these states. The other swing states that Joe Biden won, let's take Georgia, for example, won by 0.2%. Arizona won by 0.3%. Nevada won by 2.4%. The margins of victory in these 78 electoral votes on the new map, on the new 2024 map, it's actually a little bit more on the old map. But these 78 electoral votes were won by very narrow amounts, even with a 5-point victory for Joe Biden. Had Joe Biden won the popular vote by the same margin as Barack Obama in 2012, Democrats would have lost this election. And that's a very big problem for them moving forward, because no matter how much the national numbers may say they are in the lead, that's a given. That is a baseline. If they're not winning the popular vote, they're not winning the election, period. And I think that's something that the Democratic Party is going to have to face, that Republicans will not have to win the majority of voters or even the plurality of voters to win elections from now on. But that's the basis for the Democratic Party. And, all else equal, if we're at a 50-50 tie in the popular vote, Republicans are going to obliterate Democrats on the national level. Republicans have the advantage because Democrats need to win the popular vote by large amounts to even remain competitive. Had the election ended up 1 point more to the Republican Party, Donald Trump would be our president today. He would have won Wisconsin, he would have won Georgia, and he would have won Arizona. That's a lot of electoral votes. On the new map, that's 38. That is enough to overturn the election results. And I think that, the Democratic Party realizes that, even with a 5-point victory on the presidential level in the national popular vote, they still narrowly won. The electoral map is slipping away from the Democratic Party. It's getting increasingly more hard to win in certain states because, a lot of the Democratic vote is coming from very big population centers. And that's not to say those votes wouldn't count as less, but because of our electoral college system, Democrats can win the popular vote by 4.5% as Joe Biden did and still lose the election. It really comes down to how these swing states vote. And I know, that's how the electoral map is supposed to be, that there still is small state representation. But it's very possible that if Democrats win by 4 points or less in the popular vote but still win it, they could lose elections. If Democrats win the popular vote by 1 point, they could lose by 50, 60 electoral votes. The electoral map favors the Republican Party more. They need to do less in order to win these states. They skew to the right of the popular vote election after election. There are rarely any elections where the tipping point state is to the left of the national popular vote. The only time that's actually really happened now, I would say, is maybe 2008 because of the overwhelming victory for Barack Obama in these states, and maybe 2012 because of the solidified victory in the Rust Belt. But also, even with that intact, it's very difficult for Democrats to even try to replicate this 2012 map because even with a 4.5% victory, look at the margins in some of these swing states. Florida still went to Trump by 3.4%. If it was a 50-50 tie in the popular vote, as elections have been in the past, Florida might have been an 8-point margin of victory for Donald Trump. Even with a 5-point swing, Pennsylvania only went to the Democrats by 1.2%. What would have happened if Joe Biden had only won the popular vote by 3 points? Well, it likely would have gone to Donald Trump. And also, the idea that some of these states are going to be forever competitive if Democrats can't win the popular vote is completely false. If Democrats aren't doing what Joe Biden is doing, replicating his popular vote margin, say goodbye to North Carolina. Say goodbye to Texas. Even with a 5-point margin of victory on the popular vote, Iowa and Ohio still went to Trump by 8 percentage points. Swing states won by Obama in 2008 and 2012, plus 8, even with this obliterating victory on the popular vote. And I think this also shows that the popular vote truly does not matter. Because even though the popular vote went to Joe Biden by a very large amount, it was an exceptionally narrow presidential election. It took 4 days for us to find out who the winner was. It took retakes for the Associated Press to call Georgia, to call Arizona. It took audits. It took all of this struggle. And I know many of us already knew who the election winner was going to be, but the fact that it was this close, with such a large margin of victory on the popular vote, larger than 2012, when Joe Biden was also on the ballot and Barack Obama won 332 electoral votes. The map is slipping away from the Democratic Party, and they have to work much harder now compared to they would have had to do in the past, because the Democrats don't have this whole this gauge that they used to have on the popular vote. It really all came down to, who was winning in the head-to-head matchup nationwide, who was winning in some of these states. But they realize now that the popular vote could go to them in some cases by 6 points, and a Republican could still win the presidency. And I think that also highlights, maybe the Electoral College isn't as fair as it's been put out to seem. Because I understand the defense for smaller states. But also, I want to point out that safe states are rarely visited by candidates. You see, there's always going to be a neglected electorate by candidates, regardless if we have a popular vote system or an electoral college system. This system has been in place for centuries. It's probably never going to change. But I don't think that it's necessarily fair to see how, one vote wouldn't exactly equal one vote, especially when you're looking at different amounts of representation. I actually made a video about this way back when, probably 2-3 months ago, with Mr. Beat. You can check that out at the top right corner of the screen, discussing the legitimacy of the Electoral College, what would happen if it was mathematically fair. And we actually came up with the conclusion that you can't mathematically assign electoral votes to our map to make it equal representation all around. No matter what, some states are going to be overrepresented and other states are going to be underrepresented. That's just how our American system works, which is why this one actually is a pretty good representation, actually probably one of the most perfect ones, but it doesn't mean the system is necessarily fair. But that's not my point of this video. My point is to show you that the Democratic Party must do much more in order to win elections than the Republican Party. Now, not to say Republicans don't work hard to campaign for a lot of these states, but if all else was equal on the popular vote, Republicans would be taking it away election after election after election. They didn't in 2020, but Joe Biden probably should have won by a larger amount than he actually did. This reminds me of 2008 on the presidential level. Barack Obama won the popular vote by 7.2%. He won 365 electoral votes. That's roughly 2.7% more than Joe Biden's victory. You see, Barack Obama won Michigan by 17 points. Joe Biden won it by 3. Let's go at 2012, a year that was much closer in the popular vote margin. Michigan, another perfect example, won by Barack Obama by 9.5% with a smaller popular vote victory for Barack Obama than Joe Biden. And it still ended up being a very solid victory for Barack Obama. I mean, the tipping point state, I believe, might have been Virginia or Nevada. And looking at, the results then, the Democratic Party is probably envious of the support that Obama had and that previous Democrats had in certain states because it didn't require them to do super well in the popular vote. But the Electoral College map has been, shifting in such a way that Democrats can win the popular vote in the, upper hand by 6% and still lose the election. And Democrats are going to have to do a lot to work against this, PVI from Cook that shows you that a number of states are more Republican than the national average, and that's true. The states that Joe Biden flipped from Donald Trump are still more right-wing than the national popular vote. Even though Michigan swung by 4 points, it's still more right-wing than the popular vote. And the popular vote used to be something that was winnable by both candidates. It was something that was in contention. While George W. Bush didn't win it in 2000, he only lost it by 500,000 votes. This time, Donald Trump lost it by 6 million votes. 7 million votes, actually. 5 percentage points. In 2016, he also lost it. He lost it by 2-3 points. 2012, Romney lost it by 4 points. 2008, McCain lost it by 7 points. But still, looking at the margins of victory for the Democratic Party on the popular vote in previous elections, especially in 2020, especially in 2016, it really meant nothing because the electoral map was leaning in such a way that Democrats could do very well on the popular vote, but it would mean nothing because of where Democrats get their support from. And I know that swing states are meant to be swing states, but I just want to point out, Democrats have to do more. They need to win the popular vote and win the Electoral College. Republicans only need to do one of those to win the presidency. Technically, Democrats only need to do one, but based off our current electorate and based off of where the support lies, Democrats need to do both. And if one isn't happening, obviously the other isn't. And I don't think Democrats can win an election with less of a percentage than Joe Biden had. Because even with a 4.5% victory, think about it, a 4.5% victory, Joe Biden was on the brink of losing. Joe Biden was on the brink of losing. He was within 0.6% of losing the election, despite winning the popular vote by 5 points. So there's definitely something about the system that skews to the right, just because of, the Democratic Party winning in a lot of the states, running up the popular vote, but not necessarily doing it so well in the swing states. Not to, underscore any type of electoral college victory in 2020. I mean, Joe Biden did very, very well. He flipped a total of 5 states, but I do want to point out the Democrats moving forward, they will have the popular vote likely in the bag election after election, but the electoral college likely won't be. As 2016 showed you, as 2000 showed you, Democrats can win the popular vote, sometimes by large margins, and either come very close to losing or lose the election. Happened twice in the 21st century. Think about it. Republicans haven't won the popular vote in 6, or actually now I think 7 out of the 8 most recent elections. They simply haven't done it. 7 out of the 8 most recent elections, the Republicans have not won the popular vote. But they have won 3 out of the 8 most recent elections, 2000, 2004, and 2016. So something is definitely, different about our electoral college correlation to our popular vote, looking at what makes sense, who wins where, what that means for certain swing states. And I just think that the Republican Party definitely has an advantage when it comes to the electoral college map. I originally said the Democrats do because of the states that they have in the solid column, but as 2020 showed us, as 2016 showed us, a lot of states became competitive, became in contention, and I think that, all else equal, the Republican Party absolutely has the advantage on the electoral college map, which is also partially why I think many of them are so quick to defend it. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my post-2020 election videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.